Welcome to Water Awareness Training for 2014. This is going to be the PowerPoint portion of your training. We're beta testing a system that allows us to do a PowerPoint along with the audio from an instructor. And if this works out, hopefully we'll invest in a little better microphones. So the second portion of this will be along with the SRT guys out at Daybreak Park that Don McLemoyle and I are coordinating together to do the practical portions of this. So the course objectives go along with NFPA 1670. Basically, we're going to talk about the procedures for any sort of water incident, what resources we want to respond, as well as what different personnel at various certification levels can do, and recognizing the hazards is a big one. The other big thing that we're going to go in depth a little bit with is the risk versus benefit and the rescue versus recovery portion of this. And so the awareness level is just, this course was created by Chief Doughty years ago. And basically it's for any of us as first responders. He also done it for search and rescue people, and so on and so forth. The awareness level is basically just like that, kind of the same model as the hazmat, is that we want you to be aware of the different problems, isolate the problem from other people. So kind of tapping on my personal experience from an incident at Paradise Park. One of the biggest things, especially if you have a summer drowning at a water hole with a lot of other people, one of your biggest things is going to be isolating the problem and making sure that you're only looking for one person who's drowned and keeping people out of there. And then, just like everything else, assessing the situation and summoning the assistance you need, whether that's specialty units or just more apparatus there. And then as far as awareness is concerned, it's basically the kind of like hazmat, is that you can do some basic things, but for us it's not getting in the water. The operations level, and this is where you get into your technician more of your technician level stuff, and that's where we can get in low risk situations. So it is one of those things where we have to use our good judgment while we say don't go in the water. If you're at a wading pool, I'm sure myself and all the chief officers would expect you to use your good judgment to be able to go in 2 feet of water for low or moderate risk. The technician level, this is where we're talking about getting in dry suits and specialty PFDs. So most of the people assigned to Engine 24, as well as the firefighters assigned to Tower 26, a lot of them have specialty training that are swiftwater rescue technicians, and that's who we're talking about there. So that's the level where we're actually going to get in the water and do some offensive things to get people out. These county death rates are a little old. I actually looked for some new ones. They're a little hard to dig up to find all the different things, but basically the statistics kind of played out the same thing as is that in general of unintentional deaths in Clark County pretty much play out the same way, where MVAs are probably our highest, poisonings being both intentional and unintentional. Falls are we have a lot of deaths from, and then drowning is actually 3 times higher than our fire rate. And I know from my personal experience is that I've been on multiple drownings, and not that it hasn't happened in the district, I personally have not been on a fatality fire. Our rescue priorities are very similar to everything else we do. The first is make sure that we ourselves are safe. And we'll talk about this here in a minute, that a big portion of that is making sure we have our proper PPE on, which in this case is a PFD. Even before we get out of the rigs, especially if you're going to a drowning, and doubly so if a child is involved, it's going to be an emotionally charged event, and you're going to get sucked in rather quickly if you don't make sure that you're securing yourself first. Then your team, make sure our crew and everyone else of the first responders is being safe. And remember, that also means our brothers from the law enforcement side, that we need to ensure that they're being safe as well, and have PFDs available if they're in that environment and don't have them. And thirdly, our victim, to make sure that we can get them out as much as possible. You know, I know we're all willing to make a push to the limits of our training skills and equipment, but we need to make sure that we don't push ourselves beyond that to get a victim. And a big part of that we're going to talk about here in a minute is if that victim is a viable victim. And then as we talk about how to do this, we want to use the lowest risk methods possible to make it happen. So equipment. This is something, if you haven't looked at it in a while, look at it. Look at what PFDs are available on your apparatus and make sure that they fit you. Not only that, make sure that they fit underneath your turnouts as well. So they should always be worn during water rescue, always during fire operations that are, especially here in Ridgefield on the docks down there, or anytime we're dealing with a water situation. So make sure that they're stored in the extended strap position, especially for those of us who are a little larger, who work on the same apparatus as some of you are a little smaller. Unless you have the proper equipment and are trained, do not tie a rope to a PFD. You will notice the SRT guys do have vests that have a quick release that you can tie a rope to from the front, and we can do what's called live bait, where you can have somebody swim out with a rope on their back, and then it works really well that they can grab them, and you as an attendant can pull them in. So helmets. This is probably one of the biggest mindset changes we have to have, is when the bell ring, it is almost automatic that we put on our fire gear. We're used to doing it for fires, we're used to doing it for car wrecks, but we have to have that mental switch that with a water rescue call, the same gear does not necessarily help us. So no fire helmets, and if you do have a helmet for it, which probably means you're one of the SRT guys who are going in, make sure it's a proper water helmet. So another thing is no turnouts, one in the water. I'm not gonna address that in today's water awareness. There's some old videos out there, and somebody actually showed me a video from, I believe it was Tualatin Valley, that they're now debating how buoyant you are with turnouts on. Either way, as long as you have that PFD underneath your turnouts, you're going to be all right. But for water rescue, unless you're dealing with a fire situation, no turnouts, because they're going to get waterlogged very quickly if you end up in the water. But if you are helping people, most of our gear is similar to this, is dry suits. And so sometimes if you're on a crew that you're helping with an SRT person, you can help them assist into this. We don't have any wetsuits typically. We do have some of these kind of survival suit type stuff on the fireboat. for inclement weather, but it's not meant for getting in the water. Hypothermia. Hypothermia is going to be one of our greatest problems once we get the victims out there, and could even contribute to uh, how well our victims can help themselves in the water. A couple years ago, Engine 27 had a fisherman that flipped his pontoon boat just above a few rapids. I believe it was Dave Bridges and Scott Galster got there, did a great job of getting the guy out with a rope bag. But one of the big issues was he was literally, his waders were full. He even had a PFD on, but he was teetering on a rock. And when we got him out, he was so cold his hands could barely close around the rope when it was thrown to him. So there is a little bit of a clock if they're in a precarious situation. Hypothermia is you're gonna be playing beat the clock a little bit on getting them out of there and how much they can help you. Kind of the rescue philosophy that goes along with this is, as much as possible, doesn't matter if you're awareness level or the technician level, if we can stay out of the water, that's our number one choice. If we have to go in the water, we got to make sure we have the right gear and the right training for that. So the three components for the rescue stuff is make sure we have the right equipment, the right training we're doing right now to make sure that it all comes together for the right capabilities. And then for our four main priorities when we're looking at rescues, there's a good acronym called LAST. The first is locating the victim. However we need to access the victim. And then we're starting to get into the medical of it, the stabilizing and the transporting the victim. When we're looking at from low to high risk options, one of the things is talk them out of the water, out of the danger area. A lot of times the people got themselves into this situation and they can probably get themselves out. It's just a matter of they're freaking out when they're doing it. There are times when you don't want them to do that, where you want to talk them into staying in place. And just like any other incidents, we want to have one person be the point of contact with the victim. We don't want multiple people yelling at them directions, especially along the water. It's very hard to hear. So if you can talk them out, that's number one. Reach, and while reach is number two, it's one of the things that we don't always think about is to bring pike poles or something that we can reach with along the side or along to the site as we leave the rig. Throwing is kind of our go-to, the rope bags. That's one of the things that I think everybody should practice. It's not that big a deal. Take it out when you're doing rig checks, throw them down the sidewalk, put a couple cones up, make a game of it. We'll definitely do some of that with flowing water for the practical portion of this. Row, this is where we start getting into the technician level stuff. Our department has made the line that for our raft or our boats, at least, for the raft, that you need to be a swiftwater rescue technician to operate on it, just because you could be getting in and out of the water, and there's some technical things with that. And then we also do have the fireboat and rescue boat that we may, on larger bodies of water, be going out, and you don't have to be a swiftwater rescue technician for that. And then other options, you actually start thinking about things like helicopters from the Coast Guard. And then other options beyond that, being creative on whatever the situation's going to take. We already talked about. you know, just try to talk the person out of the water. Um, Reach, again, a pike pole, anything that you have handy to actually give somebody something solid that they can grab to pull them out of the water. Um, Throw, most of the time will be our rope bags. Occasionally you may have a life ring. There are some in different sites that I've seen around swimming holes. Um, we do have life rings on our boats. A lot of times we will use that to throw to a victim as we go by, so that we can assess what's the best way to safely come up to the victim. Or if we know that there's a person gone overboard, you may see us throw one overboard just to kind of get a flow rate um, of where that person could be or could have gone to. Throw bags, again, our bread and butter. Most of ours are 75 feet long. You need to practice with these. Um, and again, the big safety thing is don't tie off to the rescuer unless they have a quick release. One of the things, besides just throwing them out of the bag like this, is to practice throwing that second throw if you miss. Also, the big thing being, make sure that you have secured the rope so that you're not just throwing the whole rope bag out and don't have an end of it. With the throw bags, just make sure that you've got it secured on one end. Um, as it's going to get hit by a swimmer out there, whether it's the rescuer or your victim, make sure to brace yourself. One of the things you want to do is also, you don't need to pull them in any sort of swift water. If it's slack water, you may need to do some pulling in. Is just brace yourself and let them swing to the shore. The next thing is, somebody needs to be coordinating who is throwing rope bags. You want to throw, you always want to go with plan A, have one person throwing. They may or may not be the person talking to the victim. Again, it all depends on how dynamic the event is. Sometimes you've got a person out on a rock. You've got some time. You can get safeties in place. You can do all that. And other times you show up and they're floating down the river and you're going to throw that rope bag that's in your hand. That's why it's important for everybody to carry a rope bag if possible. And everybody to be versed about it, because you don't know if it's going to be the intern or the officer who is going to have that chance for the grab there. But if you do have it and you do have multiple ropes, make sure that that person who's talking is coordinating who throws and when they throw. And then, like I was talking about earlier, as you throw to this person, you hold on and then you can swing them to the shore. If possible, and you see some sort of strainer or rock undercut or some sort of hazard, you want to get up here if possible. But it's just like any of our other operations in the fact that we make the best decision we can with the situation we're given, and we're not always given a great situation. The row out there is our raft. Generally, we're going to have 2 people on it. One of the reasons that it is a oars type raft versus just having paddles like we all like to do if we're going down the Deschutes, and it never made sense to me till I started doing it, is the fact that one person can control it with the oars, and then it leaves the other person available to be a rescuer. So you may need to assist getting some of the SRT guys into the water with that or out of the water. Boat types, hopefully you've all got to get out and see the fireboat. Basically, for where we're looking for for water is if it's the Columbia, big water, we're going to be using our fireboat. If it's the Lewis River, both East and North Fork, we're going to be using our rescue boat, which has the jet sled on that. And then anything smaller water than that that is navigable, we will be using our raft. One of the things to remember that not everybody keeps in mind is that even for something like Horseshoe Lake, we do have a motor. It's not a Zodiac like this one, but we do have a small kicker motor that attaches to the back of the raft that we can use to get in spaces, especially when you start thinking about flooding situations. Go and tow. This is about the most dangerous thing that we're going to do in the water, where we actually get in the water with a victim. And this is what, as we're doing our awareness training, the tech guys will be working on going out into the water and grabbing victims. One of the things that you always have to worry about with a victim is that they want air more than anything else. As the summer progresses, it's a predictable story that will be on the news that someone in one of our local watering holes will start drowning, and it'll be their brother, their sister, their buddy, whatever the case may be, will go out to try to save them, and the first person will drown the second person, because as much as they love them, they want air more than they want this person to be okay, and then they typically both end up drowning. So it's a sad story that happens every year, and we want to make sure we're not part of that cycle. Other operations you may see out there, again, like I said, that one of the last resorts would probably be bringing the Coast Guard in to pull somebody up, or depending on the type of access issues we may have to set up some sort of rope system. Resources out there. For us, as the first responders, it's going to be whatever apparatus goes to the incident first. If we have a water incident and you know it's a water incident, especially if you have somebody in the water, not just out of the water, that would be the time I would dispatch Engine 24 and Tower 26. The thing you'll see when we do some of the awareness type training is it takes a lot of personnel as well as a lot of technicians to actually do an operation. From there, if we think it's going to be a big operation and a long operation, we're going to dispatch the technical rescue team as well. All of the technical rescue team is Swiftwater Rescue technicians, and they have some more resources. There's a Oceanid raft that District 6 has, as well as the heavy rescue carries. So there's some issues there. Dive teams, we can dispatch the dive team. If we're dispatching them, it's probably a recovery versus a rescue. So that's something to typically just do through CRESA. Boats that are out there, District 3 does actually have a little Zodiac. I believe it's still in CAD according to Chief Yeager. So just know it's available. It's not something they're going to regularly staff, and I don't know if they'd take it out. It's mainly designed to go out on Battleground Lake. District 6 does have a Zodiac, so it's not something that's going to go in real shallow water, but it is something that they could put in Lake River or Vancouver Lake. I don't know what ECFR's boat is, and then I already talked about ours, as well as the Sheriff's Office has some boats that are available to us. Site control. We talked a little bit about this earlier. Probably the biggest thing is going to be bystanders, especially if they're family, to control this. Like I said earlier, this is a good one for law enforcement to get involved and get involved early. especially if you have a large crowd. And during the hot months around here, you could get some large crowds in some of our parks that have swimming holes. So, risk versus benefit, like anything else we do, we want to think about, is this a rescue or a recovery? If the person is below the water, uh, unless they said they went down and they went down right before you got here, and they can give me a last point of origin, um, I'm not going to. I'm going to consider it basically a recovery, um, and even in that case, that's going to be a high risk type thing. Um, the Swiftwater rescue techs are all issued masks, um, and do some very basically we can put our heads below water and see if a body's down there, and if we see something, do some diving with another person with us. So that's a big thing, is risk versus benefit to think about. So measure the pros versus the cons, um, and that's a big part of it, is get your hands around it. If you're the first in unit, it's like any other scene. Assess the situation, get a good grasp of what's going on, and then start ordering resources accordingly. So the types of patients that we're going to deal with, if they're under the water, they're probably deceased. There is something called the mammalian diving reflex, and basically what that says is, with the colder the water and the younger the victim, the greater chance that we could possibly revive this person. And that's why you see on the old TV show like Rescue 911, kid was under the water for 30 minutes, and they come back up and they get resuscitated. So the big, and I'll let the medics address that, is, pretty much with the drowning, especially cold water drowning, they're not dead until they're warm and dead. So we're gonna work these people. The next one is the people who are struggling to stay on the surface. This is the real danger, where we're dealing with a dynamic event, and if we don't help these people soon, they're going to turn into the people under the water possibly. So that's where being Johnny on the spot with a rope bag and having practiced with it is going to really help out. This is where we find a lot of our victims, is in the water but in a stable position, whether they're on a rock, a tree, whatever the issue may be. Sometimes it's just a matter of they had an event and they got swept to the wrong side of the river, where there's not good access for them to get to a side of the river where they can be evacuated. And sometimes that's the only problem we have. And then here's where we kind of get into the medical problem, is they're onshore after they've nearly drowned. And it's one of those things where anybody who's come to near drowning needs to be assessed in the ER, because there's things called rebound drowning and a few other problems that can go along with that. So again, just going through this step by step. Is there a viable patient is our question one, and then we can start going, is this person on the surface of the water? Are they right there? I would say probably half of our calls we get, we may end up with a bank search, where we know they're in this area and they're going, but we don't know exactly where they are. So sometimes we have to actually do a bank search from the different sides. Think about activating TRT. Think about getting the tower and engine 24 going. And then if you know what resources are needed, that's going to be a big help, especially for engine 24, because they're going to be thinking about, do we need to bring the raft or not, depending Or do we need to take a boat, and if so, where are they at, and what type of water are we going to be dealing with? Um, and then if the patient's under the water, then you're going to be starting to think other things. You know, we'll make the effort, um, but we're not going to do a huge risk for somebody under the water. Um, Other part of the hazard assessment besides the possible victim is the water itself. How fast it's flowing, uh, what type of area it's flowing through is going to be a big factor of how dangerous it is for us. Remember, at the awareness level, you're not getting in, but the more information you can provide the swiftwater rescue techs coming in, the better they're going to be able to mentally prepare as well as suggest resources that you may need. So looking at them here, you have a static pond, you have a car you can kind of see in there. Again, it's not going to be a high risk type water versus, okay, we've got a rapids here. You're going to have possibly some drowning machines depending on the hydraulics there, and that's a more dangerous thing. Anytime you see a vehicle, especially in a flood stage, we used to have this scenario at Reman Road years ago when I started, and they've kind of fixed the drainage problem there. A vehicle in the water is a dangerous situation, and we'll address that here in a few more slides. The other things are, okay, do we have the person out of the water? Again, now we're going to start getting into the medical stuff. Are there things that could be entrapping the person? As well as sometimes we're just seeing, okay, there's a kayak floating down, or there's a person here in the kayak floating down. Just kind of assess that and let the next resources in know that. So going into the components of our size up, just get your arms around the facts of the situation. You're going to think about probabilities of, okay, if there's no one above the water and they say they went right down there and they've been down for 5 minutes before you showed up, the probability is they're probably dead. And then versus probability of, you know what, it was my kid, he doesn't know how to swim very well, he had a life jacket on, and he just got flushed out of the area and he's floating down the river. Okay, well, there's a good probability we have a viable patient then. Our own situation, what resources we have with us at the time, training and equipment, and then start making your decisions from there and make a plan of operation. So the other big things that can affect it besides time of day, basically with time of day, is it night or not? That's going to be a big issue that's going to slow down how well we can do a lot of things. Days of the week, that's going to, be more of a probability of who's going to be here and those sorts of things. Number of victims going to be a big issue. You want to get a clear number of how many people are we missing. So that's going to be something you're going to want to make sure you're there on. And then victim situation, is this person young? Are they old? Do they have any flotation device with them? Those sorts of things. Past site history, I think we can all think about, the places that we typically have issues. Louisville Park, Daybreak Park, sometimes in La Center, Paradise Park, and then the Ghost Bridge off the Lewis above Ridgefield. Those are probably our big ones that we have issues with, but it doesn't mean it can't happen in any part of water in our district. Again, one of the probabilities too you want to think about is what's going to happen if I do nothing. If somebody's below the water, you do nothing, they're still going to be below the water, and it's not going to make a bit of difference overall. Versus somebody who is waving their hand out in the middle of the river, um, and they're in a precarious position, and you do nothing, there could be a bad outcome. So think about the probabilities with that. Your own situation, uh, what resources you have on hand, making sure that you are physically safe. Do you have a SRT with you, or how long are they going to be out there? So those are all things to think about. Decisions. The big thing with this is to get the best information you can, make the best choice you can, and go with the plan that you have. Just know that that we have to make decisions that are going to be second guessed with all the information later, and don't be afraid to make those decisions. A general rule is go with a plan until it sucks, and then adjust if you need to. So we just kind of talked through that. Is think about what you got, plan about what you're going to do, and act. And then big one is have plan B there. We'll talk about that in a minute as far as having safeties beyond your first option. So a little bit of river orientation. Everything on the river is oriented according to flow. So as it flows, if you're think about that you're floating on the river, everything to your left as you're facing downstream is going to be river left. Everything to your right is going to be river right. So just keep that in mind for orientation when you're talking to people about where people are. And then kind of like a hazmat scene where we have zones out there, you know, the hot zone's in the water, so that's where your technician level comes into play. The warm zone, anything within 10 feet, that's where awareness operations level that we're doing here is. And you need a PFD because you never know when you're going to get sucked into a situation that you could end up in the water. And then the cold zone is anything out beyond 10 feet. I'm just going to briefly touch on a little hydrology and river dynamics. Eddies are basically where behind a rock or something else there's a lower pressure that kind of reverses the stream. And actually you can get behind that and take shelter, and that's where we'll find a lot of people is as they're swimming along, they're just looking for some place to stop, and they'll get behind a rock, and then if they can, they'll climb on a rock or in a tree or whatever they have some large movable object. The last point seen, that is a big one. If you do not have a person that you can see, is where was this person last seen? And especially if it's like in a swimming hole and you're looking for somebody, you want the person to stand right there, and you maybe even want to put some cones out so that you can say between the rock on the other side and this cone, this is the line where the person told me it was. And then you're going to have probability of detection, and that's where you think they probably could have ended up, especially in a flowing river. That's when you're going to be looking at eddies and things like that. We already talked about river right and river left, and then strainers are any debris, typically trees, that water can flow through, but you're not going to flow through. So here's kind of a picture of an eddy. You have your rock, the water's going this way, and then you can get inside this bubble line, and literally as you're swimming along, if you put your hand right in here, you can pull yourself in pretty easy and get behind the rock. If you want to get real fancy and have a rock behind a rock, you can actually get a reverse eddy inside of an eddy. So there's a good picture of sweepers. You'll see that a lot on the Lewis River, especially in the East Fork. Foot entrapments. Foot entrapments are a dangerous situation. that we got to think about. And again, as an awareness level, this is probably one of our more dangerous situations that the person's going to want to be pulling us out into the river, by asking for help. And that's where we just uh, have to be strong and say, no, we'll throw you a rope. Um, and there are some techniques we'll show and we'll practice of how to possibly help a foot entrapped person without going in the water. And then once you get a several swift water rescue techs, then we can talk about actually what we can do in the water to get a foot untrapped. And it typically happens a lot of times as the flow goes along, a person gets their foot caught in a rock or just some sort of obstruction inside the water, and the flow will push them, especially with higher flows. Coming back to what I was talking about earlier, vehicles in the water are a very dangerous thing because while they look like an immovable object, they're not. They can be a very dynamic thing. So you have a couple forces going here. You have the weight of the vehicle, then you have the buoyancy. The tires are going to have air. If you get to the old VW bugs, they used to be airtight, and a lot of them would float more. And then you have the stream force going along that's actually pushing on the vehicle from one side, and then you're going to have friction force from the tires or the side of the vehicle or whatever's rubbing against the ground. So it can be a dynamic event, and we may want to do some things to try to secure the vehicle before we get the patient off, all depending on the situation. So here's just some different things where you can see they have different forces that can actually act upon a vehicle, and you can get vehicles moving. Here's some more pictures where you'll actually see it doesn't take that much water to bring a vehicle up, and they have been even known to roll as water acts upon them. So the solution to that, if possible, is to stabilize against the force of the river. I probably this wouldn't be my first option. If I've got one victim, it's kind of like a fire. If I can remove the victim from the problem, the victim from the vehicle here, that's going to be my first choice. The scenario where I see using this is actually where, say, we've got a patient in here who's not stable, or we have multiple patients, or a patient that we have to extricate that we can't get out right away. We're going to want to stabilize the vehicle and then remove the victim from the scenario. Car behavior underwater. If we do have one go off into deeper water, if the water's deep enough, they typically will tumble and end up wherever the motor is, that being the heavy part. So a lot of times they will end up upside down on the front where the motor is. So we've got some rules that we use for the SRTs that are good for everybody here. So we're just going to go for this, and then we're going to end this. So number one, always wear your PFD within 10 feet of the water's edge. I think I've hit on that a few times. On rivers, always deploy upstream spotters. We didn't talk about this yet. So above the location of an operation. So especially if we have a big operation and we know we've got a lot of traffic on the river, it's just like a freeway or any other road. We want to see what's coming down at us. And so we want to have spotters to see if anything's coming towards the scene. We've already talked about, make sure our scene priorities are self-rescue first, the rest of the first responders, and the victim last. Number 4, always make sure we have a backup plan, because typically plan A doesn't always work, so you got to have plan B ready. And number 5 goes right along with it. Always have multiple backups downstream. So if we're throwing ropes to somebody and it's not a dynamic event where we know they're out on a rock, before we throw a rope to them and have them get in the water, or even if we are going out to get them, we want to have multiple people with ropes below the person, for our safety and their safety, and from both sides of the river if possible. As much as possible, keep it simple. You know, the simplest rescue is going to be the best rescue. While it's all kinds of fun to set up, big highline systems, if we don't have to do it, let's just keep it the simplest we can, and that's going to be the most effective option. Always use the right equipment. Never put your feet down if you're swept away when you're swimming. That's how you get foot entrapments. Never count on the victim to help in their own rescue. While if it's a dynamic situation, you're going to try to throw them a rope and have them do it, but don't count on that. Try to have a rescuer ready to go get them if they can't. Never tie rope around a rescuer, the exception being if they have a special PFD that's designed for it. When tensioning a line across the river to be useful in water safety or walking stream crossing, never do it at a right angle, which means straight across the river. You always want to do it at an angle, so that way if anybody hits it, they're going to slide to one side or the other. And this is a little bit more SRT stuff. While tensioning a line across the river, never stand on the inside of the bite. Always stand on the upstream side of the rope. And this is a big one that they stress in the SRT stuff, once you have a victim is contacted, never lose them. Have a death grip on them. Given a choice between a fire helmet and no helmet in the warm or hot zone, go with no helmet, and then always be proactive. So kind of the review for this whole thing is more people in Clark County die from drowning than fires. Make sure we got our PFD on. That's a big protect yourself first. Make sure we're good with our rope bags, and then last resort is always going in the water. So thank you for listening to this. Let me know your thoughts on how you think delivering training this way goes. And there's a prize for whoever counted how many ums I said in this. See you on the river.